Kia ora and welcome to the New Zealand Film Commission 4th live webinar. Thank you for joining us this evening. And a special thank you to those in Auckland who are currently in level 3 at the moment. My name is Molly Littlejohn and I'm the Marketing Coordinator and Social Media Advisor at New Zealand Film Commission, and I will be moderating the webinar today. Tonight's webinar will cover the Screen Sector Recovery Fund and Capability Funding, which are a part of the Government Screen Sector Recovery Package. Our speakers today are Chief Executive Annabelle Sheehan, Head of Development and Production Leanne Saunders, and Head of Talent Development Dale Collette. Thank you to everyone who emailed in their questions this week. We hope to cover all of them today. You also have the opportunity to ask live arising questions if you click the question button to the right of your screen, and we aim to answer these towards the end of the session. I would like to now introduce Annabelle to open tonight's webinar to discuss the current climate of the screen sector. Hi, Annabelle.
Kia ora koutou, ko Annabelle Sheehan toku ingoa. Welcome, so great to have you here. And I want to start by talking about the re-emergence of COVID in Auckland and how that just reminds us of the dangers of this pandemic and how it's important to take account of it and be careful and care for our health around us. It presents significant challenges for those in Auckland and in the industry trying to continue with their productions, and we're very mindful of that. I'm hopeful that the health and safety standard protocols launched in May can provide support to some productions that could work at level 3 in a contactless environment. Some can't, and we know how difficult and upsetting that has been. Level 2 framework is also covered in those COVID guidelines. So for those productions taking place around the rest of the country, level 2, it's still possible to work if you can work in a socially distanced manner for your production. So since production could restart in May and June, it's been gratifying to see how many productions, both international and local, have been able to get started. Poppy was the first feature film to restart in June, and since then we've seen a range of local and international productions get underway, including Shortland Street, including Avatar, lots of projects getting underway. But no doubt this latest small outbreak, but quickly contained, we hope, has still caused concern for filmmakers, and we hope to be able to support you through that. Obviously, COVID is not just affecting us here in New Zealand, it's all around the world, and it's affecting how markets and festivals run. It's affecting sales agents and financing, etc. So it's a lot of challenges for all of us to take on. NZFC took part in the inaugural Cannes Marché online and supported 100 New Zealand producers and industry practitioners to attend. And in addition, we've been hosting the opportunity for New Zealanders to keep their contacts going with global market through one-to-one meetings with sales agents, financiers, major streamers and studios. So there've been about 121 meetings with sales agents. There's been another 100 meetings with financiers, and we've got 50 experienced producers currently meeting with major streamers and studios, AMC, Apple TV, Disney Plus and Netflix across July and August. So we really want to see New Zealanders be able to connect with the world and get their projects financed so that we can get underway. In other good news, This Town, which was the first New Zealand film to release post the COVID shutdowns of cinemas and since they've reopened, and it's been #1 and it still is #1 at the New Zealand box office. Congratulations, This Town, we're so proud of you. Even with cinemas closed again in Auckland, sadly, the rest of the country has been able to flock to the cinemas, and we hope everyone will continue to do so, in particular this weekend when we've got Low Down Dirty Criminals opening. In our last webinar, we discussed the recovery package in more general terms because it had just been announced by the government. And so tonight, as Molly said, we're going to talk about it in more detail, give you some details around the guidelines. So this is the $13.4 million fund, which is kind of the Make Good fund for projects that were underway or planned at the time of the shutdown. So I'm passing you to Leanne. And she'll be able to talk about both how that affects projects with discretionary funding from NZFC and screen production grant funding projects. Thank you, Leanne.
Kia ora, Annabelle, and kia ora koutou. Ko Leanne Saunders aho, and I'm Head of Development and Production, as mentioned, at the New Zealand Film Commission. Yes, the Screen Production Recovery Fund is part of that package that was announced in July, and primarily it's intended to support productions to get back on track and deliver them through to release. As Annabelle mentioned, there's been a total budget of 13.4 million announced. Tonight, I am going to be covering off more about the fund, but there are some details that we are still working through as we've worked hard to get it out quickly in order to make applications open for people. We've got 2 staff on board who have been contracted to deliver. They are Vicky Jackways, who's managing the fund, and Tom Kelly, who's coordinating. Hopefully the industry know, or if you don't know, our guidelines went live on Monday, so you can read them now up on our website. And we also have our application portal, which is now open as of last night, and that's now ready for applications. If you haven't been on our portal before, you will need to register, and we have a team who separately is available to assist you with that. But I'm going to hand over now to Dale, who's going to talk a little bit about how short films will access the fund, and also regarding the Capability Fund. Over to you, Dale.
Kia ora, Leanne. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Ko Dale Gillette tōka wingoa, ko Ngāti Kānunu ki Wararapa te iwi, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. Kia ora, hui hui mai tātou. I just want to tautoko Annabelle and Molly's sentiments to our whānau in Tāmaki Makaurau. We know how hard it is for you, and our feelings and our thoughts and strength are with you. So kia kaha. So yeah, as Leanne said, I'm here to talk a little bit about the shorts and how you access the support for the recovery, and then also about the capability funding, which we mentioned in one of the previous webinars. Although I tried to mention it and I froze, so hopefully I won't freeze tonight. So in terms of shorts, it's very similar to the feature film approach. So the guidelines are the same. Obviously, you'll have less fields to fill in and all of that. The short film application process will go live in the next day or so. So probably early next week, you'll be able to access that. The features are already available. But in principle, if you're a committed short film that we've already funded, or you're whether that's in production, pre-production, production, or post, you'll be eligible for support if you need it due to COVID. And the same for things like fresh shorts that have already been funded but maybe not in process yet. So all the details will be clearer in the guidelines and on the website, so go there. And Vicky and Tom are there to help guide you through the process as well. But for shorties, if you need help as well, you know Jude and I are here as well to help guide you through the process. So I hope you can navigate your way. In terms of the capability funding, as we mentioned on the last webinar, so this funding is really for the sector to try and build its resilience, its business and technical capability to recover from this pandemic and to grow into a more, I guess, resilient sector in the future. So there's 4 key areas we've mentioned last time. One is the core support for the peak organisations. So that's the guilds and industry organisations, training organisations, to help them support their members and support the wider sector. There's also a skills and industry development program that we'll be supporting. So we already fund work in this space through our talent development grants, but we've got some additional money to either expand some of those programs or for new bespoke programs. And this will also cover above and below the line roles. So it's broadening out a bit more than we normally do. There's going to be a new short content fund that's really focused around trying to build audience development and brand IP, getting producers and creative collectives to help build their audience and start building their brand locally and internationally. And then the final one is our on-the-job development, which we've had a lot of success with our online version of our on-the-job mentorships. And so we want to revamp that and keep doing that in the year. So just to give you some kind of dates, so you know what's coming up. The core support for industry organisations and the training programs, so those first 2 are going to be open hopefully next month. We're just finalising our guidelines at the moment, so the next couple of weeks. So in September, they'll open for funding. The new short content is going to take a little bit longer. We're still scoping that project. So that'll be ready by the end of the year, November, December. We hope to open for funding in that. And the on-the-job development, similarly, by the end of the year, by December, we will have some new opportunities, whether it's internships, mentorships, or professional placements. So just to be clear, this is not replacing any of our baseline funding that we normally fund through talent development. So fresh shorts, Catalyst, other talent grants we have available. We still have available interactive funding. We still have available. This is additional to really help with the re-emergence of the sector. So back over to you, Molly.
Thanks, Dale. Now moving on to some questions that we've received via email this week. A reminder, you can ask questions in this webinar via the question button, and we aim to get to them towards the end. So my first question here is, if my production started after March and I couldn't get cover for COVID, would I still be eligible to make a claim? Leanne, you might want to speak to this.
Sure. Look, you may be eligible even if your production started after March. Our criteria, which you can read on the website, it allows for planned productions that have offers or provisional certificates in place from March the 21st through to December 31, 2020, as well as productions that had commenced and were underway at the time of lockdown. However, the productions that were going in March will be prioritised. So bear that in mind, and we obviously have a capped amount of funding, but we will allow planned productions that meet the eligibility to apply as well.
Thanks, Leanne. And another question that you might be able to cover here, will there be any funding for new ventures and startups designed to function post-COVID-19, such as funding R&D activities, new business, production models and technology?
Hi, look, we always put our existing funding into an annual business and slate funding program called Boost, and this year the NZFC put in 1.2 million into 33 companies, including those with new ventures and COVID-related business plans, and that included a new fund called Boost Up, and that had a more flexible criteria, and that could allow for possible R&D. So we'll just continue to review what's needed by the industry before the next round of boosters launch, likely to be early next year.
Thanks, Leanne. Another question here, has any thought been given to virtual production practice, pre and post-production? Annabelle?
Well, New Zealand Film Commission is across those developments, but we don't currently fund standalone elements of production, except insofar as we do have a post-production or finishing fund. We invest in projects via producers and production companies, many of whom are actively taking advantage of these new technologies. So we're very supportive of the fact that New Zealand can position itself to be a great place for exactly this kind of service.
Thanks, Annabelle. Are other screen sectors going to be considered, i.e. VR, AR, MR, XR, games and animation, or is the focus primarily live action and documentary production? Likewise, how much focus is there on post-production sector? Dale, you might want to take the first part regarding interactive.
Sure, kia ora. Yeah, so we do have our interactive development fund. We've had that available for the last 3 years. And we'll have that again available. It'll be open for applications, we anticipate, next month. So we're finalising the guidelines at the moment and working closely with the sector, the Games Association and others to finalise those guidelines. So that fund is, as I said, for R&D, for research and development of interactive projects, VR, AR, mixed reality. So we're excited to have that fund open again in September.
And Annabelle, the secondary part of that question is, how much focus is there on the post-production sector?
So as I said, we do have our post-production and finishing funds in various programs. We also administer the New Zealand Screen Production Grant for post-production and visual effects. That in 2019 and 2020 provided incentives for the post sector in the form of $29 million worth of grants that triggered a spend of $149 million in that post sector. It's really an important sector to us. We value and are very proud of the work that is done by post and visual effects houses in New Zealand. If the question is about, does the recovery package specifically address that? It doesn't, except insofar as post is part of the 13.4 million that we can provide to productions that may have had issues arising in the post area.
Thanks, Annabelle. Another question we have here is, how will the New Zealand Film Commission manage issues around transparency and equality when allocating funding? Leanne, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, sure, Molly. Look, we publish all our guidelines, and this includes criteria around eligibility and how we assess our funds. We will allocate specialist external assessors as required in order that we make robust recommendations, and that can include those with specialisations in financial and budgeting analysis. We also have conflict of interest process that's included in all our contracts with staff and also contractors. We ensure our pool of assessors published on our website include Māori and diverse assessors. We've also increased, NZFC have increased capacity to capture data in order that our applications demographic versus our decisions, and this expanded data set will be published in October this year.
Thanks, Leanne. Given that there are travel/physical constraints, can existing funding programs such as travelling to film festivals, can those funds be reallocated for deliverables and film festival submissions, for example? Annabelle?
Yeah, so the budget for 2020-21 has been confirmed, and we've already reallocated what we would normally spend in those areas to programs that fund and invest in all across the board development and production. So we've reallocated those funds for sure, and are thinking carefully about how best to support people continuing in the world of festivals and markets. But in general, we're focused on reallocating those funds to get projects into production.
Thanks, Annabelle. And sort of a similar question here, as film festivals are being cancelled, postponed, reorganised for small audiences, social distancing and or moving online, are the NZFC guidelines going to be revised, e.g. to incorporate the needs for theatrical broadcast and web sound mixes? Leanne, would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, Molly, look, we have obviously discussed this internally since, the COVID situation arose. We identified these issues early on, and we've already announced changes to our guidelines in that regard early in May. So you'll find that we've published a COVID-19 policy document on our website, and for example, we've loosened criteria around market partners and also theatrical requirements.
Thanks, Leanne. Another question we had emailed in is, we have been running upskilling training for people due to the new jobs coming through. Will there be any ways for businesses such as the Rebel Fleet to access some form of training support similar to a trainee subsidy? However, these trainees will all be contractors. Dale, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure, Molly. As I said before, the capability funding will be available for both above the line and below the line roles. So although we can't comment specifically about companies or their specific programs, they would be eligible for that funding. So that funding will be available to apply for next month.
Thanks, Dale. Now we're going to go through some of our live Q&A questions and some other questions from the public. Just a reminder that we're going to try and get through as many as we can, but we will see how we go on this. So the first question we have here is, I believe it's about the recovery fund. Is the funding equity or a grant? Leanne?
Hi, Molly. Look, the nature of the screen recovery funds and how they're applied to any finance plan and recoupment waterfall is, still needing to be taken on a case-by-case basis and considered, potentially taking into account around whether those productions have already been contracted or whether they are yet to be contracted and other such factors.
Great, thank you. And another question here, are productions able to claim NZSPG on the costs?
Look, Molly, the portal provides the option to apply for 100% of those costs or 60% of the costs if the production is NZSPG qualifying. However, you will not be able to use the funding from the recovery fund and the NZSPG fund to cover the same percentage of those costs.
Thanks. Another question here, am I likely to get all the funding that I asked for from the recovery production fund? Leanne?
So every project is going to be assessed on the criteria. So it may be that not everything that you apply for will be determined as passing the criteria, and you'll see in our guidelines that, you know, we have the ability to apply to allow the quantum that we determine for any one project.
Thanks, Leanne. Annabelle, what happens if the money runs out and I haven't applied yet?
So that is obviously a worry, as Leanne said. It is a capped fund. It does relate to activity up to 31st December this year. We're going to keep a close eye on how the fund is going, what the call on the grant, what the call on the fund is. And we'll also be in touch with MCH to keep them aware of how that fund is moving forward. We'd obviously be trying to look at opportunities for other funds to support projects if we do move all the way through the money, but at this point we are not able to answer that. We've been provided with 13.4 million, and that was calculated based on best case scenario for what we knew at the time, but we will obviously see how things flow forward.
Thanks, Annabelle. A question we have here is, in the application portal it asks for a revised finance plan. Do we add insurance applied for and received the revised finance plan and show it as a non-recoupable funds? Do we include the amount we are requesting from the Screen Production Recovery Fund to the revised financial plan, or is a revised finance plan only if we're changing any of our funding structures and insurance, SPRF, just reimbursing the COVID costs and we leave out?
Okay, I'm going to try and answer this really simply, but I'm very aware that the person, and maybe others here tonight, may not get the answers specifically that they want. So I should say that we do have an email address, which is screenrecovery@nzfilm.co.nz. And so, you know, after tonight and going up, we will be answering specific questions on that. And a very simple answer to this is that when you come in, you should be outlining all of your COVID-19 costs. Now, there's two types. There can be COVID-19 costs that have already been incurred, and then there can be COVID-19 costs that you are estimating that you will need for your production upcoming. So you need to clearly outline those, and obviously, you know, we would be putting them in a format where you'd show costs that you've incurred to date and those that would be in your estimate to complete column. And then your revised finance plan should show any other potential sources of income to cover those costs. So if there are other sources of income, such as insurance, etc., you should, or other government funding or anything like that, you should show us any other sources of funding you have to cover. So we want to see basically the full picture.
Thanks, Leanne. Dale, I have a question for you here. Is there space for people from the industry to approach you with ideas for skills and industry development / job placement opportunities, or is it going to all be run through an NZFC program only, e.g. like the mentor program that was largely defined and facilitated internally at the NZFC?
Absolutely. So we're always open, irrespective of the COVID situation. We're always open to great ideas and great proposals from the sector, whether they are training providers, industry professionals who deliver development support, or the more formal guilds and industry organisations. And this is no different. So yeah, we're still open. We're always open. And yeah, if you've got great ideas, come on down. So just email me, dale@nzfilm.co.nz, and we can start having a conversation about what you're proposing.
Thanks, Dale. Another question we have here is, if I apply for COVID-19 relief funding for costs incurred to date, which gets approved and paid out, but then after that another COVID-19 cost was incurred, could I then still reapply for that? Leanne?
Hi, Molly. Look, at the moment, the guidelines there's nothing to prevent productions from making more than one application. I would say that it does say that we have the right to change the guidelines or revise them at any time. So at this stage, there's nothing to prevent productions from making more than one application. However, one, it is a limited fund, and then two, it does require comprehensive documentation. So we're wanting people to come in with comprehensive documentation. So I think that that's probably the idea, is to come in once for as much as you can determine, and there would have to be, you know, a significant event for us to look at a further application. I would say also any costs that are not spent, we do also have the right to audit. And so if you do not spend what you come in for, it will require to be repaid.
Thanks, Leanne. Another question we got is, in this COVID environment, can provision be made from this funding allocation to pay sick leave to discourage crew from turning up to work when they are ill, as ScreenSafe and the Ministry of Health guidelines require? The American studios shooting here, such as Netflix and Amazon, have sick pay available. Annabelle, would you like to perhaps speak to this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's an important one that is affecting every workplace, and it is important to make sure that people who are not well are not mixing with others, and especially not knowing what the source of the illness is. I think specifically the guidelines may not have called out or described that situation, but hearing that question tonight, I'm sure, Leanne, you could comment further on the capacity for us to make sure that that's a consideration.
Yeah, look, what we're asking for people is to provide a line-by-line explanation. So for everything they come in, to provide a line-by-line explanation. We've never been through a pandemic before, so we are literally walking through this for the first time. So everything that you put down will be considered. We may require further backup around, you know, contract documentation, etc., but we will be considering anything that hasn't been specifically laid out as things we won't cover, and that is specifically laid out in the guidelines. We will consider everything else.
Thanks, Leanne. A question regarding short films. Will non-New Zealand Film Commission funded short films which have been impacted by COVID and the lockdown be eligible for this fund? Dale.
So we're still working on that. So priority obviously has to go to the films that we've already funded, we're already supporting. And at last count, that was about 27 short films in various stages of pre-production, production or post. But what we are looking at exploring is whether or not we can have a special way in which short films could access our post-production support, that, you know, short films that were affected by COVID, if there's a way that we can look at our guidelines to allow shorts to be able to be supported in that space, because we recognise there are a number of short films and short film makers out there that have been affected at that stage in their process. So once again, we're looking at that. Hopefully in the next week or two we can finalise that and let you know.
Thanks, Dale. Leanne, is there any cutoff date that the application for COVID relief needs to be applied for by?
No, but we are talking now about providing a register in the coming weeks. This will be advertised either through our website, or if you want to join up for our newsletter, we'll keep people in touch. We're thinking about this so people can indicate if they intend to come in. And so it helps us to understand whether people are thinking about coming in when they're not ready to put in a full application. This won't give you a place in the queue, so to speak, but it will help us to know the demand and also to keep in touch with producers. So there isn't a cut-off date per se, but I would advise people, if they are thinking about coming in, to keep an eye out for that register and to register on it.
Thanks, Leanne. Another one for you here is, if the process for review/approval is up to 6 weeks, do films in production have to effectively stop work until we know whether or not the claim will be approved, if the funding is vital for completion of the film?
This is on a case-by-case basis. So when people come in, we are going to be asking them how they are proposing to cash flow any COVID costs, whether it be current or up until that point. So look, every production's got their own solution to this. Some productions are able to cash flow, some of them that are contractually closed are not able to, and they are going to need to suspend. Again, you know, this is the sort of thing that if we can help with, and it may not be the Screen Recovery Fund, it may also be the development and production team here, who has investment executives, can also assist with advice with productions about how to really understand the best solutions for them. But we are aiming to get back as soon as we can to people as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that we put the proposal up as taking about 6 weeks, because that is typically the kind of process that you might have to go through. But we're very aware that some productions are in an urgent situation, urgent setting, and we have got capacity to be flexible and to work with our COVID subcommittee from the board in relation to approving funds in a faster turnaround when needed.
Thanks, Annabelle. A few people have had some questions about the 50 million screen production fund. They say, I appreciate it isn't part of the webinar, but is there any update on the guidelines for the 50 million screen production fund? Can you please outline the timeframes for the guidelines and consultation with industry on the fund? Also anticipated application deadlines and timeframes for decisions.
Mm-hmm. So we're still in discussion with MCH and NZ on air, but we have some very finite details around how we expect the fund to operate. The main thing is we need approval for the framework from government, and we need that framework to be as broad as possible so that the guidelines can call out as many projects as are developing. We really want there to be a fast turnaround. We're aware that people want to start spending the $50 million as soon as possible, 25 million per annum. We're very hopeful that in this next quarter, we'll be able to announce at least a first phase round so that we can get funds out the door as quickly as possible. So it's been moving apace with a lot of meetings with government, and including discussions with Sparta so far, and soon, of course, further consultation expanded around the industry and guilds. So we would expect to be working on discussion with industry through late August, early September, and then finalising those guidelines soon after that. Leanne, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that you've covered it really, Annabelle. I think this is just, it's a wonderful opportunity. We all recognise that this has a real potential to be provide a lot of long-term impact for the industry. So everybody's very keen to spend the time to get it right, while also recognising that there is an urgency to provide that support to the industry as well. And yeah, it's an exciting project that we're all very committed to.
Thanks, Leanne and Annabelle. Just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Another question we got here is it possible to include regional information in your diversity data sets explaining how funding is allocated from this scheme, e.g. women, Māori, regional New Zealand? Annabelle, perhaps you could answer that.
Is that specifically talking about the $50 million fund, or?
I think this is the recovery fund.
I could answer that if you want, Annabelle. So like all of our funding, we request data for our key people, and this fund will also be requiring applicants to come in and provide those data sets, and then those data sets are now being reviewed, so we will be able to provide those. So we hope that will be of use to the industry and how the applicants and how we award the funding.
Thanks, Leanne. Another question for shorts. What type of content will the short content fund cover? It sounds like promo/branding content. If so, can individuals like freelancers and indie filmmakers, etc., access the fund?
The short content fund is still, as I said earlier, we're still scoping it at the moment, so it's still up for grabs a little bit, but we don't imagine it would be promos or branding in that sense. It's more around the branding of the creative voice, of the creative talent, the collectives or the individual talent that are making the content and their brand, and helping them grow and develop their audience locally and internationally. I think it's a great opportunity for people to make content, get out there and build their brand, build their audience, and build investors into their future careers. So that's where we think it'll probably land. As I said, we're still developing it over the next few months. But yeah, not so much brand or promo kind of content. I imagine it will also be online, as opposed to most of our shorts and our short film initiatives are more traditionally into festivals and then that route that helps progress talent, whereas we think this might be an amazing opportunity for us to support people to make stuff online and build their audience there. So that's what we're thinking.
Thanks, Dale. Another question regarding the COVID recovery grant. What happens if the amount of the pre-register interest from companies is triple the amount of total COVID recovery grant? Who gets priority, and is the COVID money a grant or equity? Leanne? Hi,
look, priority is for productions that were contracted or committed as at the 23rd of March. So that was the number one priority. We identified 47 projects that were in that stage. A number of them were in post-production. So those productions, we have an idea of, obviously more of an idea of what the demand is from those in post, which is obviously a lot lower. So essentially, once your film goes into post-production, the COVID costs or the costs of closing a production are way higher than they were for projects in post. Additionally, the projects that were in production as of 23rd of March were also majority, although some of the SPIG we don't necessarily know, but the majority of them would have had some kind of insurance, and so they have also been making claims under insurance. So that's sort of the first bunch, and then as we said earlier, we are also opening up to productions that are eligible under our criteria, which is those that have provisional certificates or have an offer between 23rd of March and to 31st. In terms of, this is why we really encourage people to register once we get it up. We don't know what that quantum is going to be, and at this stage all we can say is that's the amount that the government have given us, and so we don't have an answer to the demand. We feel comfortable that we will be able to manage those priority projects within that fund, and then how far that stretches beyond those that are in the plan stage is yet to be seen. In terms of whether the money's a grant or equity, I do believe I answered that earlier on in the piece, and as has been mentioned, it may depend on what stage, and also we're still getting into the detail of that.
Thanks, Leanne. Now, last question here is about underwriting insurance. Is there any updates on insurance here, Annabelle, that we've heard of? Or
we've certainly provided as much information as possible to government to ensure and that they have that information. They're very cognizant of how urgent the situation is and how important it is to have an underwrite, a risk underwrite for projects to be able to move forward. We're really hopeful of getting an answer on that in the coming days, but we, you know, there's a lot of government processes to go through, some of which may have been slightly disrupted by the recent COVID issues that arose, the resurgence. So, but yeah, we are talking about it every day with government, and they're very much aware of how important the proposal is and how it would work, how it would operate.
Thanks for the update there, Annabelle. And last question that just quickly snuck in there. Leanne, you might want to answer this one. Will a production registered for the NZ SPIG but not a provisional certificate still be eligible for the recovery fund?
Molly, no. A production will be required to have a provisional certificate to be eligible for the fund.
And that provisional certificate would have been issued between now and the 31st of December, is that correct? So
yes, that is correct.
You may not have yet got your provisional, but you can get it between now and 31st December to be eligible.
Yep, correct.
All right. Now, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. And thank you to all those who submitted questions. We had about 26 or 27 of them in the end. A big shout out to our wonderful speakers, Annabelle, Leanne and Dale. We had around 130 attendees this evening, so thank you for joining us. This webinar has been recorded, so your friends or colleagues who have missed it will be able to see it over the next couple of days. We just want to say to keep safe, especially those in Auckland, and we will see you all again soon. Haere rā, thank you so much.